So in my last video I made about Squid Game Season 3, I mentioned that there was criticisms of the season that I've seen across multiple videos, and just in general, whether it's YouTube comments, social media, etc. And as someone who really enjoyed Season 3, I thought some of the criticisms that I heard came from a couple different places. One, people not understanding the show. Two, people's expectations either being, unrealistic, too big, or just not in line with what the show is setting up. And so in this video, I'm going to tackle the most common criticisms I've seen across multiple videos. And I will also say that there are criticisms of the season that I agree with, but not 100%. So when those come up, I will express my issues with those parts of the show. And this is basically a part 2 of my last Squid Game video where I gave my analysis and interpretations on the final season. And I think watching that is important to further understanding my thoughts on the show. But one final disclaimer, I'm not making this video to shit on these people as creators. I'm simply just expressing my grievances with their criticisms of the season. And these aren't only specific to just the creators that I, put in this video. As I've said, there's been multiple videos that all say the same thing. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and let's get into it. So the first video is from a channel named The Canadian Lad. This is someone I've actually watched for a few years now, and I really like his videos, but I didn't like this one. Let's get into why.
Number 1, the story feels incomplete. Look, I'm a Marvel fan, so I've got no problem with cliffhangers. Throw them at me all day long. But what I do have a problem with is when a story just refuses to finish what it started. Squid Game Season 3 never answers the biggest question of all, why? Remember back in Season 1 when Junho asked the frontman that same exact question? Well, 3 seasons later, you'd think someone would finally give us an answer. But nope, Inho just dips. No explanation, no closure. Just leaves without answering the question. And what this does is it robs Junho from getting any closure. We've been waiting 2 whole seasons to see this emotional payoff. And instead, what does he get? A random-ass baby and a pile of blood money he didn't ask for. He's an honest detective who doesn't care about the money. Neither does the baby hold any emotional significance to him. Yes, he'll probably figure out it all came from his brother Inho, but the real question still hangs in the air, why? Why did Inho, who actually won the game, choose to come back as the frontman instead of walking away? And that's exactly why the finale felt so hollow. It was missing that final face-off between the two brothers, which could have been something epic. Even one simple line of dialogue from Inho, like, "I started enjoying the killings," would have been an answer. That would at least give Junho some peace of mind of knowing why his brother did what he did.
So this is like far and away the most common complaint of the show that I've heard, and there's been different varieties of people saying basically the same thing. And personally, I do think they could have concluded the detective story in a more satisfying way. But my issue with this part of the show is not that we never get an answer to the question why, because we did.
Anyone who died was simply a player who lost the game. Trash eliminated from the competition, and as we speak, our world is filling up with more and more trash. You still don't see, do you? If the world doesn't change, the game doesn't end.
We got that answer in the beginning of Season 2, and throughout the rest of that season and Season 3, mind you, I'm thinking of these seasons as if they're combined, basically the same season. And I think that's important to mention because yes, technically it is a new season, but I think people are failing to realize that this isn't really a new season, it's just still Season 2, just with a different number above it. And I'm not saying Canadian Lad is doing that, I'm just saying people in general. Regardless, Season 2 further explores why Inho not only got into the games to begin with, but it also shows us the differences between him and Gi-hun, and why Inho became the frontman. And I feel like it gives us a satisfying conclusion, even if it's not a happy one. A conclusion where Inho is changed by Gi-hun and seemingly done with the games. In my opinion, that's at least what I got out of the ending. And Inho goes out of his way to make sure Gi-hun's legacy lives on by giving his legacy to his daughter, and Junho, who's a good person that he knows will take care of the innocent baby that Gi-hun gave his life to preserve. And I talked more about this in my last video on the show. So while I do agree that the detective should have had a more satisfying conclusion, I don't really think it works if he gets this conclusion with Inho that people want. Because realistically, like, let's look at this, right? After this story was concluded, if you go back and you look at the plan they had to stop the games, there's no way this story works if the games are actually stopped in the middle of them. And I talked about this in my Squid Game video, but I mean, a big theme of this show is that the games will never end. The show was never supposed to have some grand stopping of the games with the detective, and the good guys get to go home and see another day. No, it has a tragic ending. And not getting getting closure on something I think is part of that tragic ending. And realistically, if Junho and Inho got a final conversation, all it would have told us is things that we already know. So I think the more fitting conclusion to the detective story, whose internal struggle that was mostly focused on was not being able to move on from the games and his brother, and, you know, losing faith in the police system, a better ending for him would have been to just let the stuff with the games and his brother go, and to see him trying something else other than the police force to help people. And we partially do see him move on, like in the ending we see he's moving on. And I mean, after all, he did stop the games in this part of the world, even if it was too late. He didn't stop it, you know, in general, but he did stop it in this part of the world. He was the reason the games got destroyed. But after this, all we get is him being confused on what to do next. And the scene where he finds the baby and the money doesn't really conclude anything. Like, sure, we see him moving on and continuing his life, which is the conclusion that I think could have been expanded more on, because we have no clue what he might be doing now other than taking care of the baby. So that is where I would say the problem is. The problem is not we never got an answer to the question why, because the whole season is answering the question why. And it's a battle of those clashing ideologies. But I would also say that people are severely gassing up the actual amount of screen time that Junho and the boat crew have. Like, genuinely, if you go and watch like the rest of the season, or both seasons combined, I think they actually might have like 20 minutes of screen time total over the course of like 13 plus hours of season 2 and 3. So even though I do partially agree with this criticism, just kind of for different reasons, I don't think it's that big of a deal as I've seen so many people make it out to be. But let's keep moving on with this video.
Number 2, inconsistent character behaviors, namely Gi-han and Lee Myung-gi, because their character arcs in this season are all over the place. Let's talk about Gi-han first. He's devastated after losing his friend Jung-bae. And not just him, a whole group of people died because they followed his lead. So Gi-han was broken from the inside. When that shaman lady tries to provoke him, his first instinct is to strangle her. And we've never seen Gi-han snap like that before. But that's totally fair. That guilt is eating him alive. Later, that same guilt pushes him to strangle Daeho, blaming him for Jung-bae's death. So far, all of that tracks. It's consistent.
So before I move on to his criticisms here, I just want to give credit to Canadian Lad for actually having some media literacy as opposed to other people I've seen think that Gi-han acting this way makes no sense, and it's genuinely stupid to not understand why Gi-han crashes out in the beginning of the season is acting this way. Unfortunately though, I wish Canadian Lad would have understood the rest of what he's about to criticize.
Gyun is spiraling and it shows. But then things get weird. The frontman gives him a knife and straight up offers him the chance to kill everyone in their sleep. Now, based on where Gi-han's mental state is at this point, he should have no problem stabbing player 100. And yet he hesitates. He imagines Se-byuk telling him not to do it. And that's where things start falling apart. Because wait, what happened to the guy who just killed Daeho a few episodes ago? Gi-han already crossed a line, emotionally and physically. So why pull back now? So which one is he supposed to be? A righteous soul who can't bring himself to kill? Or someone slowly being consumed by the game, losing more and more of his humanity? You can't have both.
And that's the part I'm disappointed in. What I thought was an understanding of the character was kind of short-lived. And I'm not trying to bash Canadian Lad as a person here. Like I said, I've enjoyed his content for years, but I can't understand how he and others don't understand the very clear reason as to why Gi-han spares these people. Yes, he's crossed the line, but even when he was mentally broken, we still watch him struggle immensely to actually kill Daeho. And after he did, he almost kills himself after coming back to being a bit more level-headed with the reality of his past actions and the current situation he's in. And after the baby is born and the mother talks to him and he remembers Se-byuk, he gets reminded and he gets put back on the right track from others, just like he was in season 1, of who he is and why he's in these games to begin with, why he came back. He doesn't kill these people because he believes that every one of these people deserves a fair chance, even if morally he thinks they're throwing away their humanity. Now obviously he defends himself in the event that they are actively, in that very moment, in the exact moment, trying to kill him, which is why we see him stab one of the guys in the final game. But that doesn't mean killing them unfairly is the right thing to do in Gi-han's mind while they're sleeping. He's waiting until the very last moment until they basically force his hand. Even when Myung-gi was like dangling on his coat about to fall to his death, Gi-han still didn't want to let go. And when he says that the show can't have both, I just completely disagree. Like, seeing a character fall and lose their way only to get back on the saddle and keep pushing is a very common thing in storytelling. I mean, like, the easiest example I can think of off the top of my head is Spider-Man's Black Suit arc in multiple different stories, or Invincible with Mark in season 2 and 3. There's no flaw in having a character, you know, getting broken and finding the will to push through even when they stumbled. That's not inconsistent character behavior. There's very clear cause and effect to why Gi-hun is changed in the beginning of season 3 and why he is changed again as the season 3 progresses.
Now let's talk about Myung-gi. In season 2, this man had people cheering for him. But in this season, he was this close to killing his own baby just to survive. Now I know some people might say, come on, he wasn't really gonna do it. It was just a bluff to shake Gi-hun. Okay, maybe. But even as a bluff, that's a massive shift from the guy who once looked to Junhee dead in the eyes and said this.
네가 나를 죽여. 게임 시작되면 너 찾아갈 테니까 그 칼로 나 찌르고 너 여기서 나가. 그럼 너랑 아이는 살 수 있잖아.
And during the jumping rope game, he offered Junhee no help once he realized she has a fractured ankle, while Gi-hun kept motivating Junhee till the last second. Some can also argue that the death of Junhee had a major impact on Myung-gi, and that's why he changed. But that's not true either. He was already on a killing spree during the hide-and-seek game, when Junhee was still alive, which resulted in another needless death, by the way. And keep in mind, this is the same Myung-gi who was traumatized after killing Thanos in season 2. The same guy who could barely function because of the guilt. Junhee literally had to sit him down and tell him to pull himself together, to move on and be normal again. So what happened to that guy? How did we go from remorse and regret to cold-blooded killer? It doesn't track. It's not growth, it's not a descent into darkness, it's just inconsistent. Myung-gi keeps flipping between hero and villain depending on what the plot needs in that moment. That's not character development. It's just plain sloppy writing.
So this criticism is something I've already partially responded to in my last video, so I'll just play a quick clip from that and then respond to the extra stuff that my video doesn't respond to. Dude, now like I said, I've seen criticism that it was, you know, bad for this guy who could have maybe been redeemed to just turn into a raging psychopath and then die, but him turning into a psychopath right here and him crashing out essentially, this isn't out of nowhere. Yeah, sure, he seemed, you know, cool and collected and tactical about things, but at multiple points in season 2 and this season, because, you know, they're combined, we see the foreshadowing that this guy is not going to be able to change. And I do think he genuinely cared about Junhee. And the reason I say this is because after Junhee dies, he changes his vote from wanting to leave to wanting to stay. But I don't think he actually cared about their baby. I mean, hell, he wanted to abort the thing. I think these two scenes are crucial to understanding this. One, in season 2, where he asked Junhee to combine their shares, pay off their debts, and, you know, live a life and invest their money in some new stock deal. You know, the same kind of thing that made him lose all his money to begin with and got him in there in the first place and kind of destroyed him and Junhee's relationship. And the second scene is this.
For you and our kid.
It's that easy for you to kill someone.
Yes. I'd do anything for you and the reward, even if it meant killing everyone.
And I'd do anything to keep my baby safe.
You notice how in that line of dialogue he says, I do anything for you and the reward. Like, yeah, sure, he mentions the baby, but that's because that's what Junhee wants to hear. When he says, I do anything for you and the reward, that is where we see where his motivations lie. But when Junhee dies, all he has left now is the reward. And yes, while I do think he would have saved the kid if he had the chance, and by chance I mean not being him or the baby, then as we see, having a stable future where he doesn't have to deal with, you know, the same kind of people or the same kind of thing that got him in the games to begin with was more important to him than his own child. Now, Canadian Lad also says that Myung-gi was traumatized after killing Thanos and that he could barely function, and Junhee had to sit him down and tell him to get it together, to move on and be normal again. But this just isn't true at all. After all that happens, yeah, we see Myung-gi like sitting there and taking in what he just did, but all Junhee says to him is this.
이따 불 꺼지면 바로 숨어. 무슨 일 생겨도 절대 나서지 말고. 그리고 너 피 좀 닦아.
And like, you had to have rewatched the scene to get the footage for your video, so like, I'm confused why you said this. Like, I don't want to say you're intentionally lying, but you're definitely not being truthful.
You calling me a liar?
I ain't calling you a truther.
But anyways, he says that this isn't growth or a descent into darkness, but I think a further descent into darkness is exactly what this is. Like, after you kill someone, you obviously change as a person. These games in general make you change as a person. We see it throughout every season of this show, with multiple different people. So saying it doesn't make sense that, you know, Myung-gi Myung-hee goes on a killing spree to get more money and to save Junhee, it's just completely wrong. And like I said in my video, the show puts out clearly where Myung-hee's motivations lie and leaves little breadcrumbs showing that Myung-hee will not be able to change or become a better person. And the final thing I want to talk about is when he says Junhee's death didn't change Myung-hee because he didn't offer any help to her after he saw that she had a broken ankle. But this doesn't mean that her death doesn't have an impact on him. Like, we see very clearly that he very much cares about her. Just because he doesn't have the same kind of faith that Gi-hun has doesn't mean that he doesn't care about Junhee. It just means he's being realistic and recognizing that he can't help her in her current condition. The next part of his video is him talking about the VIPs, and I'm not even gonna really bother playing it. I'm gonna say the same thing as him and everyone else. Yeah, they're cartoonishly evil. They add nothing new to the show this time around, and their screen time isn't interesting. I think they're also pretty cartoonishly evil in season 1, but it's definitely a bigger issue for, more reasons in this season because they genuinely don't really add anything to season 3. So, moving on.
Number 4, creator versus audience. It honestly feels like Dong-hyuk Kwang, the writer and director of Squid Game, was answering questions the audience never asked. In other words, Dong-hyuk Kwang and the audience don't seem to be on the same page. We wanted closure, we wanted meaning. We wanted to understand why all of this happened, but instead what we got was a full-blown exploration of humanity versus evil, which, okay, could have worked if it had been handled with more weight, more payoff. Yes, Gi-hun sacrifices himself to save the baby, saying, "We are not horses, we're humans," but as a viewer, I didn't just want to see Gi-hun's ending. I wanted to see In-ho, the frontman, finally face the consequences of everything he has done. Gi-hun had already given up on his life when he was begging the pink guards to kill him. His fate was sealed the moment he decided to step back in the game. So I have no problem with him dying at the end. But the way they handle frontman, that's where the real problem is. Gi-hun may have won his personal battle, but In-ho never truly lost. He never confessed, never cracked, never faced judgment. 3 times he was on the verge of breaking down. Tears in his eyes, guilt written all over his face. But he held it in, every time. And then what? The final twist reveals Squid Game isn't just a South Korea nightmare, it's a global operation. And In-ho is still in power, still running things, business as usual. And that's the biggest problem. One of the biggest reasons people loved season 2 was because of Lee Byung-hun and how damn good he was as the frontman. He added depth, mystery, and tension. So naturally, we thought season 3 was building toward a showdown of Gi-hun versus In-ho, the emotional climax, the final reckoning. But instead, the frontman gets sidelined, takes a back seat in the very season where he should have been the center of it all. And honestly, that feels like a huge missed opportunity.
Okay, I just disagree with this entirely, and I think the theme does have great payoffs for another reason that I explained in my video, especially with In-ho. Now, I would play a clip from that video, but with the way that video is structured, it would be kind of redundant to play like 8 minutes from that video, especially if you're someone who's already watched it. So instead of responding to things that I already have, I'm going to just say, watch that video if you want my take on, the stuff that I'm not about to respond to. But I will talk about something that I didn't go over fully in that video. Yes, sure, you can say he faces no legal consequences, but he does lose in the sense that Gi-hun made an impact on him and changed part of his worldview. And he does face judgment. He knows he faces judgment from Gi-hun, and he knows he lost to Gi-hun. And the final scene we get with him doesn't necessarily imply that he's still running things business as usual. If anything, I got the complete opposite interpretation, as he looks so disappointed and surprised by the fact that the games are not only still going, but they are also happening all around the world. And the final scene isn't just a cliffhanger for a spin-off like so many people like to redundantly explain it as. It's the final message of the show saying,
You still don't see, do you? If the world doesn't change, the game doesn't end.
Another thing Canadian Lad says is that In-ho is sidelined. And I mean, sure he is in, the literal sense, because that's literally his role in the games is to watch from the sidelines, and, yeah, I guess he's more like a coach, but, regardless. It's not like he's still not actively trying to break Gi-hun. He's still the second most prevalent figure this season when it comes to character work and the themes it's presenting. The next part of his video is him talking about some of the same things and stuff that he would change about the season and, fix, per se. And the first change he makes is just him saying that the detective deserved more in his ending, which we already went over, so I'm gonna move on from that and move on to the next stuff he says.
I also wouldn't have made Gi-hun turn into an outright killer just because Dae-ho dropped the ball with the ammo in season 2. Because it's pretty clear Dae-ho had a rough childhood with an abusive father who wanted him to join the Marines, but he never did. He always loved being around his sisters, and that's how he was so good at playing Gongi. So instead, I would have had Dae-ho sacrifice himself to protect this group of 3 women, because he could see his sisters in them. This would also work as a redemption redemption arc after what he has done in season 2.
I mean, sure, I agree, this sounds like it's interesting, but this also takes away from the conflict of Gi-hun and In-ho. If Gi-hun never crosses that line to kill Daeho, then him coming back to reality and coming to terms with the fact that all those deaths came from his lead, then continuing his fight even after stumbling and mentally breaking, none of that would hit as hard as it does. And this leads into the next thing he says about the show.
But above all else, the heart of the story should have been In-ho and Gi-hun. Their face-off should have been the emotional centerpiece of the season, not some quick 5-minute scene buried in 6 episodes. I get that Gi-hun was in shock, so he didn't say much during their big face-off, but if they had shared more than one scene together, if there were multiple interactions, then Gi-hun would have spoken. He would have asked In-ho the question we've all been asking since season 1, why? Why are you doing this? I trusted you so much, how could you do this? I killed Daeho for no reason because you were the real traitor. And if we had gotten that moment, I think the entire season would have hit very, very differently.
I don't think it hits differently at all, and this criticism actually just makes me upset, because we do get more scenes with Gi-hun and In-ho throughout the entire season. Every action they take is going against one another's ideal and worldview, and basically everything they do is for one another, or a result of something the other did. Just because they're not literally in the same room together doesn't mean they don't share scenes. And I'm gonna say this again. Gi-hun at this moment, as well as the audience, already know why In-ho is doing this. Like, the show has answered this question since the beginning of season 2. Gi-hun doesn't even need to speak in this scene because all the words, everything we know he's thinking is all on his face and body language. And when he's given the knife, he chooses to keep upholding his ideals. This is another scene they share together. He literally answers In-ho's question where he says, do you still have faith in people? Without even saying a single word. Not everything needs to be spoken or told to the audience directly. But anyways, that's the first video down. Now I'll move on to the next video. And this video is from MoistCritical, Charlie, Penguin Zero, whatever you want to call him. So let's get into that.
He spends 2 seasons. He dedicates like his life to trying to find this island, trying to find his brother, only to find the island, do nothing. And then like the final, montage here, it's like a happily ever after for him where they're talking about like, man, what are we going to do now that we succeeded in, finding all this? It's like, what the fuck? You didn't succeed. You actually did nothing. If you took the detective out of season 2 and 3 and everyone associated with like the trying to find the island, nothing changes. Actually nothing. So they're patting themselves on the back, fucking fingering each other's buttholes about how great of a job they did to get to the bottom of it, when they didn't do anything. All they did was arrive to the island as it was basically blowing up, going nuclear. Like, it's such a waste. Like, what is even the point in even bringing them back for that when they have nothing to do? There was no payoff. We didn't even learn anything from their investigation other than his brother is the top brass and Captain Park, well, he got involved with them and took the bad guys fishing, then became like a close pal of theirs. And then we learned like he was also in like gambling debt, which is how he even got there in the first place. But like, none of it matters. None of that matters.
Now, I know I already talked about the detective, but I want to talk about what Charlie says specifically here. Him saying nothing changes, there's no payoffs, and we don't learn anything. Now, like I said, I agree with the payoffs thing. I think he could have had a more compelling conclusion to what season 2 and 3 did with his character, but I still disagree with what he's saying here because of a couple things. 1, if the boat crew was taken out of the season, a huge chunk of tension is completely ripped out of the show. 2, we would have never seen the character development of Woo Seok, the moneylender guy who was on Gi-hun's ass in season 1 and now he helps him in season 2 and 3. 3, we would never get to see how Junho's obsession with the island and his brother ruined his life and career, and not telling anyone that his brother was the leader until he was able to talk to him, which I think is an interesting character struggle, but I agree this arc doesn't have, a good conclusion because of what I said earlier in the video. And 4, like Charlie mentioned, we would never get stuff with Captain Pak, which I thought was really well done. Again, I think he added a lot of tension to these scenes that were already, adding tension to the story, on top of the fact that Captain Pak is an interesting character himself. I think saying nothing changes about the show without the boat crew plotline is a large over-exaggeration of a criticism, and maybe it's intentional, I don't know. But on top of the fact that people acting like this plotline took up a shit ton of screen time, it's just overall a big exaggeration, I feel like. Like the whole plotline of Gi-hun getting back into the games only to realize they were played, and then, everything happens with In-ho and Gi-hun after that fact. None of that happens without the boat crew, and we lose like part of the game where it's like In-ho is constantly one-upping Gi-hun. And one more thing before I move on, Charlie says that they get like a happy ending, everybody's like going home and da-da-da-da. That's just not what happens. Like, obviously, Junho's not getting a happy ending because he gets no conclusion with his brother. And while the money-lending guy and the other dude, you know, they start running the hotel. I think that's a nice ending to those characters' story, which I probably should have mentioned in my last video, but it's pretty good that they're basically taking a part of Gi-hun's legacy, the hotel. They're remodeling it, and Gi-hun now essentially gave them the chance to be better and improve, and instead of them doing like, you know, being loan sharks, essentially, now they can run a legitimate business and where they can actually try and thrive in the society they live in. I think that's a really nice conclusion to those characters, or to that character's story, that ties in really nice to the theme of the show. I think it's somewhat happy and somewhat tragic because the theme of the show is like, you know, the capitalist society is what's causing people within that society to become who they are, or change, or, you know, just struggle so much, etc., etc. And even though that these people are taking, you know, Gi-hun's legacy and he essentially gave them a second chance to be better, they're still part of that system that is causing people to end up the way that they do in this show. So I think it's kind of a mix of both. In this specific scenario, it's kind of a mix of like, yeah, there's a little bit of hope, but it's still tragic that, you know, the systems in place are not changing in the slightest. The next part I'm going to go over in Charlie's video is where he talks about Daeho.
Annex freaks out, gets too scared, and he freezes, melts down, and he doesn't bring the magazines, which inevitably leads to people dying. Well, in this season, we see the repercussion of that, which is Gi-hun hates him. And now we're seeing Gi-hun wants to kill him. So in this game, he is looking for him actively to murder him. And Daeho doesn't get anything to do other than say, I lied about everything because I wanted to be cool. I wanted you guys to think I was cool. And then he like fights back against Gi-hun and then gets killed. And it's like, well, why even bother keeping him around? Like, the idea, I think, was to show that Gi-hun is kind of like falling apart here after everything that happened in season 2. Like, he spends the first episode kind of like in a trance, like this fugue state, and then he like snaps out of it here while like choking out and killing Daeho, and he's like, it's your fault, and then he comes to the realization like, yeah, it is kind of my fault. But like, it's still just, you don't get a whole lot out of that character. He just says like, I wanted to be cool. It's like, okay, well, that's not a whole lot of payoff for this character that we built up. I felt like there could have been more there.
Okay, I'm sorry, but like this whole area of the show, like this criticism is just so confusing. Like saying, oh, there's so much more they could have done with Daeho. It's like, okay, like what? I already responded to what Canadian Lad said about what he thought they should have done with Daeho and how it would ultimately detract from another more interesting part of the story. So I'm just confused on what exactly you guys were expecting from Daeho. And he doesn't say he lied about it so he could be cool. He explains that he lied so that he could be around people he thought he could stay alive with. And in doing that, he becomes part of the reason why Gi-hun's plan failed. Like, I just don't understand how it's not interesting that, like, basically societal standards and like, you know, societal expectations basically is the reason why Daeho lied. And when people put trust in him and expect him to be able to, you know, uphold the things he's lied about, he's faced with the repercussions of those actions. It's not like he deserved to die, but again, it really goes nicely into the theme of like what society can do to people. And like, we see him mentally destroyed and guilty over this, and he tragically dies at the hands of Gi-hun, which is interesting and in turn makes Gi-hun's story more compelling as well, who is the primary focus of the show. So he should be taking center stage. He should be the most important. Like, I just really don't get how what happens with Daeho is like underwhelming or disappointing. I thought it was a really good writing choice to do what they did with the character.
But I don't think that's like the worst case of it. Like, there are characters that get done even dirtier. Another great example, Min-soo. He's like very cowardly, but he's not like Courage the Cowardly Dog who like rises up and like saves the day to protect the people he cares about, you know, overcoming his fears. Min-soo in season 3 gets reduced to a drug addict. And I'm not exaggerating, he does. All he does now is he finds the Thanos cross of pills and he starts popping pills and then gets addicted to drugs, so he starts hallucinating and eventually he dies. That's it. Like, what the fuck is even the point in keeping him alive? Why did we give any attention to this guy throughout season 2 and like a lot of season 3 as well? Like, he does get a lot of screen time, and it seems like they're sprinkling little breadcrumbs here, a little bit of seasoning on this character that you're expecting something to come from it, but all that comes is a fucking crippling pill popping addiction. Like, this guy's fucking fiending, he's going through withdrawals, and like, he looks like a League of Legends player on a 10-game losing streak by the end of it. Like, And there's just nothing there. There's no payoff. There's nothing that comes from it. What the fuck is the point?
Again, this is the thing. This just goes back to what I said at the beginning of the video. What are these expectations you're putting on the show, and how is it not interesting to see someone who let the only person who is nice to him die right in front of his face because he was too scared to do anything? Then he takes that fear and starts taking drugs that he thinks will help him become more confident, which in turn makes him relive the same trauma that made him take the pills to begin with, kill someone, and then get revenge on the shitty person who did this to him. Then he dies because he looks like a crippling drug addict and an easy target to others, just because he wanted to do good. When before this, he didn't do anything wrong but try to stay alive. And he continued to get bullied and peer pressured just like he did in the outside world. Like, how is this not an interesting ending to his character? Like, I'm genuinely so lost on where the flaw is here in the writing. Like, they kept him alive so they could do something interesting with his character, and it was interesting. Like, this isn't a flaw in a writing, I'm sorry, but it's just a flaw in your expectations. And like, you're saying he doesn't like rise up and like, you know, fight like to protect the ones he loves, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, the ones he loves is already dead. Or technically not the one he loves, but like the person who was nice to him, you know what I'm talking about. But like, he does. It's just in a way where he becomes a crippling drug addict, which I still don't understand how that's not interesting, that someone becomes a drug addict because of society. But like, like, I feel like this show just has so many different examples and different situations and different examples of what society can do to people, and this is another one of them that I thought was done really well. And like, it's just, I don't understand. Like, I really don't. I'm just gonna move on.
This makes no fucking sense. I mean, it's just bullshit. Fuck.
The next part is him talking about the final game and Myung-gi.
Junhee was going to die here because we saw her break her ankle in the hide-and-seek one. So it was very clear she wasn't going to make it across, so she sacrifices herself, and then it is all up to Ji-hun to protect this baby. Myung-ji is still alive here, which is the father of the baby and the former lover of Junhee, which of course now puts these two together going into the final game. Big problem is, though, all of the characters we've cared about up until this point are dead. It really seems like the tag game before the jump rope was like the finale game, because that's where all of the characters we gave a fuck about lost their life. So then after the jump rope game, the people that make it are people we just don't even know, except for like the older guy. That guy is still there in Myung-ji, but other than those two, it's just faceless nobodies. Like, it's just NPCs around here that we have not learned about at all, other than like a couple of glimpses here and there. So it takes a lot of the oomph out of the final game because you don't care what happens to them.
This is another criticism I've seen people bring up, and I just couldn't disagree with it more. And it's also just wrong. Like, we have 4 characters to be interested in, with Minsu, Myung-gi, Gi-hun, and the baby. And the other players just add tension to what will happen to these 4. And I talked about why I thought it was a great choice to have this be like the ending set up in my video. And I'm gonna play a quick clip from that. I thought it was absolutely brilliant to have the final game, have him be surrounded by people who are just some of the absolute worst left. Now I said earlier that we should be able to understand these people, but while I can understand that the societal systems in place and their experiences in life caused them to act this way, and that's kind of the tragedy of it, they still voted to move on to the next game. And like, a big part of this show is having a choice. They can still choose to do the right thing. So I still don't think it makes them right to choose greed over, you know, more people being able to make it out of this alive. I can't say that they are 100% wrong, because we can't say this until we are in this kind of situation ourselves. Nobody can really. But each and every single one of these people go directly against Gi-hun's worldview and his morality. And the final person left is someone who could have changed and could have had a shot at redemption, but refused to change. And of course, I'm talking about MG Coin crypto scammer dude. Now again, the full video expands more on that, but hopefully that helps you guys understand like a bit more of where I'm coming from. And I think saying it's a flaw that 60% of the characters alive in the game are ones that we just don't care about, it's just missing the point of what the ending was going for thematically.
And it unfortunately leads to Myung-ji becoming just a psychopath. Like, they build up this character, they have him be like kind of flip-flopping, going in a lot of different directions. Like, for a little while he wants to protect the baby, protect Junhee. He does a lot of things. He even like sides with Ji-hun against the other group in like the final game, which is the Squid Game but in the sky. So he's like pushing people off, then betrays them in order to team with Junhee and protect that baby together. And then he just becomes a psychopath. Like, going into the final part after everything goes tits up, he just becomes a raving lunatic. And like, that's fine because they did kind of plant a couple of breadcrumbs throughout that kind of leads you to believe that could happen. Like, he is just all about the money and all of it's been fake. That, like, I don't have the biggest issue there, but the big issue arises in that final game where, again, you don't care about the characters, but also, like, he was so logical and like so like calculating and then all of a sudden Myung-ji just starts killing people on the second to last platform, knowing full well they need to kill someone on the last one in order to end the game. Why is he killing them on that platform? He could have just waited to the final one for that betrayal and gone from there. Well, not for the betrayal, but for like the, fucking piling up corpses. The big twist on that one, though, was one of the guys who they had beat up in order to drag to the final platform to just be like a easy sacrificial lamb. Well, that guy says, fuck you, literally just dives off the platform, killing himself, giving the big middle fingers to Myung-ji, like, I will not be your lunchbox, as they called him. So then that's when it becomes Ji-hun versus Myung-ji, and he just becomes just a full-blown psychopath, which is very, I don't know, it feels like kind of a cop-out. Like, it made you want to just root for Ji-hun, like, oh, now it makes sense why he's about to kill this guy.
I don't know why he's phrasing it like it's a problem that Myung-gi kills the people, when you know why he kills those people, and you literally said it. He's not expecting that guy to just kill himself. Maybe that wasn't intentional, that he's phrasing it that way, but I don't know. It's just the way he says it. It makes it sound like that. Because he then follows it up by saying, then another big problem arises, which leads to his next criticism, and we'll get to that in a second, but I want to talk about him saying it's like a cop-out, even though, again, you literally pointed out that there were like breadcrumbs and things that you can look back to and be like, oh yeah, this guy's probably not gonna be able to change or be better by the end of the show. So it's not really a cop-out. It's like there's foreshadowing to this.
But then another big problem arises where they don't hit the button to actually start the game, and he ends up killing him, so then it doesn't count, so then Ji-hun has to sacrifice himself so the baby wins. I like the idea of it. I like the theme of it, how the baby is like hope in the, the midst of despair, and how Ji-hun, by sacrificing himself so the baby wins, beats the Squid Game, like full stop. He beats In-ho, like the puppet master. He wins by doing that, but it also was highly unnecessary if they had just at any moment across their scuffle decided to hit that button. I don't know why they didn't.
Okay, this criticism is just like, bruh. Why are we expecting two people who are literally fighting to the death, one of those people watching the other about to drop a baby off a cliff as he's mentally deteriorating? Why are we expecting these people to be thinking tactically and logically right now in this very moment? Like, genuinely, they're fighting to the death, and you expect them to just be like, oh, well, hold on, let's stop for a second here, buddy. Let's press the button for a second here. Like, if I was in that situation, I would probably forget about that too, and be mainly focused on winning the fight. And I know someone might say, well, what's his name? Myung-gi was being smart before this, da-da-da-da. But, like, yeah, there was less of a risk earlier in the game than there was by the end of the game, obviously, because more and more players dwindled down, and it was just him, Gi-hun, and the baby. So obviously, his mental state deteriorating is gonna hit its peak at that time. Like, I don't know. I just don't understand this criticism at all. That was the end of what I had to respond to with Charlie's video. And as I went to refresh myself on more criticisms from other videos, I realized that I kind of just responded to everything I wanted to respond to. No joke, every video I've watched, and I've watched like 6 of them total, including Charlie and Canadian Lad, they just largely repeat the same beats of criticism that this video and my other video have already responded to. So I just feel like this video would get really repetitive if I kept going at this point, so I'll leave you guys with a few things. 1, when you're watching reviews or responses, remember to think critically about what's being discussed, and don't let people, including myself, sway your opinion without understanding why you agree with it. 2, this and any other response video I make, most of the time, isn't to shit on these creators. It's because I care about media discussion and want things to be laid out truthfully, and for people to hear different interpretations and arguments that can be made for things. And 3, if you guys have any criticisms that I didn't address in this video, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to respond to them. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to become a channel member for as little as $1 a month, or if you don't have money or don't want to spend money, simply liking and subscribing also really helps. And you can get access to most of my videos early if you do become a channel member. But I thank you all for watching, and yeah.